answers. So please write your questions in the chat area as they come to mind. If we don't have time to answer them all, we will make them available on our website. Next slide, please. For those of you who are not familiar with DCL, we convert and organize content to create electronic documents, populate databases, publish on the web, and basically get it ready for tomorrow's technology. Next slide, please. DCL services help you refine your document conversion strategy, identify document redundancy, extract metadata, and transform legacy and future documents for real needs, today and in the future. We serve a very broad client base, spanning across all industries. Today, we are thrilled to introduce Nave Greenberg, Director of the U.S. Defense Development for DCL. Nave is a PMI-certified project management professional with expertise in large-scale complex conversions utilizing numerous DTD and standards. He specializes in conversions for DCL's defense and TechDoc business units and has been instrumental in developing DCL's DITA 2361, 4051, S1000D, and 38784 conversion software suites, as well as working with clients to develop detailed project business rules. Nave is a member of the United States S1000D Management and Implementation Group, LAN Working Group, and participates in other discussion subgroups. Nave has been with DCL for over 10 years and holds a BE in Mechanical Engineering from Stony Brook University. Without further ado, welcome Nave.
Thank you, Adam. Hi, everyone. Hope everybody's doing well. Today we are going to cover the steps we should take during a typical conversion or migration. So the agenda for the next 40 minutes is going to cover a general view of the project methodology. Then we will continue with a detailed description of the project setup component and the conversion production component. And at the end, if you have any questions, I will try to answer all of them. And you can always email me or call me directly. It's going to appear at the end of the webinar, and I will answer any email or call that I get. So we are going to cover the main steps in the project setup phase and the conversion production phase. So here is a really generic overview of the combined project setup and conversion production steps. We usually break our process into 5 phases. Phases 1 through 3 are the setup stages, and phases 4 and 5 covers the production. So just quickly going through these phases, you have phase 1, which is where you analyze the client requirement. It's also the phase where you can start building your team. In phase 2 is where you should create the conversion specification and hand-tag sample. And you can also see that in this phase where we start the sign-off phase. And the sign-off is not just to make sure that you are covered by defining all the rules and conversion specs. Its main purpose is to make sure that all the stakeholders are involved in the process. And if the client and other stakeholders are involved, your chances of having a successful conversion does increase. And it's a great way to have everyone involved on the same page. Phase 3 is when the conversion of QC software is developed or customized. In phase 4 is when you have a proof of production, where you should run a larger but representative sample of your entire data set through the process and see that everything is running according to plan. And phase 5 is when the project enters the production phase. So as you can see, I created 2 stages. And on the left, you have the conversion setup components. And on the right, you have the conversion production component. So the first side is the setup and build-up of the project. And on the right is the production itself. And each of the steps contain 10 steps. So it's actually combined 20, but we're not going to go over each one of them. Some of the steps we will cover in details, while the other will spend not spend as much time discussing them, because we are limited with time. And some of them are very self-explanatory. So depending on your project, these steps may change a little bit, and we will talk about that throughout the webinar. So in order not to lose track and to make it a little bit easier to track the steps, I numbered the steps and also placed them on the bottom left corner. And the two circles indicate the conversion setup component that will most of the time will be on the left side, and the conversion production component will appear on the right side. In some slides it's up and down, but you can follow. So let's begin. In step one, the planning. Planning is probably the most important thing you need to do. Now you obviously need to implement planning correctly, but planning will save you a lot of headaches during the production. And in all my webinars, I'm using a quote from President Lincoln that said, if I had 8 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend 6 sharpening my axe. And this is exactly the approach you should take when dealing with conversion or migration. And the more time you spend planning, the better off you will be. And one way to mitigate the risk of poor planning is by asking the right questions. And some of the questions can be, who are the stakeholders? And really everyone that is involved in the project is a stakeholder, but it can be the management, the XML experts, the graphic teams, and a lot of stakeholders, but you will need to define them and know them at the beginning of the process. And obviously, one of the most important stakeholders is the client. And more importantly is that you need to define who is really the final client, which is really the end user. And you need to make sure that they are happy when you deliver, because they are really the deciding factor whether a project is successful or not, and they need to be involved. And other important questions to ask are, for example, what is the volume and what is the deadline? What is the format of the source data? What standard are you going to? Is it S1000D, DITA, NLM, DocBook, maybe a proprietary schema? The process will change a little bit depending on the complexity of the standard, so you need to know that. Other important question is, what kind of content management system or rendering tools will be used? It's also important to know up front. And there are many other questions, but the main point that I'm trying to make is that the more information you gather up front, the better off you will be. And the easiest way to get the answers is by maybe creating a questionnaire and maybe work together with the client to get the answers. Because questions like what kind of manuals do you have, or what is the source format, it will let you know what you're starting with and what to expect. So if you start with paper, you know that you need to include scanning and proofreading in your process. And that could affect your schedule and maybe require new resources. If your data starts in as HTML or XML and just migrating to a new standard, you may need a different skill set of resources. So the answer to this question will give you a great starting point. And you also be aware of all the obstacles that otherwise you will only find out later in the process, where really it's more expensive and frustrating to deal with. So step 2 is inventory and assessment. So you may receive the source data in batches, or maybe all at once. It really doesn't make a difference of how you get the data and in what phases, but there has to be a way to log the data into some sort of a production control system, and the purpose for that control system is to keep track of everything that is being processed in the production. And in order to do that, you need to create some sort of a unit for the data that you're converting. And a unit can be a manual, it can be a set of manuals, it could be a batch number, basically anything that allows you to track a set of data. And you can also record metadata on each of the units, and that will help you to create useful reports. So metadata like batch number, number of pages, date the units received, are just a few examples of the metadata that you can track. And with that information, you can project the delivery schedule. You can actually confirm that the process is working properly, and you track each unit to see in what step of the production process that unit is in. Step 3 is reuse analysis, and reuse analysis is very important. And the idea of content reuse is that every time something is found in your data, you pull it out and you convert it only once and use it as many times as possible. Now, in your documentation, you can assume that front matter or some sort of introductory paragraphs are similar across your data set. But exactly how much duplication and where else in your documentation there's redundancy, it's almost impossible to detect without some sort of a tool or automation. And there are a lot of benefits for reuse. First of all, it increases the consistency of your data. It reduces development time because you are dealing with less data and more organized data. And because you are dealing with less data and more consistent data, there's less maintenance, and therefore less maintenance costs. And by knowing your reuse potential, you also improve your process because you can go through your reuse report and maybe find a set of documents that are done that will be considered your base document, and then take other documents and compare them against that base document and go back and adjust any kind of variation that you find. And by the time you start conversion, you have the kind of a set of documents that are purely identical and really can be converted once and used many times. So this is just a quick example. On the top you see the same paragraph being repeated in 3 other places. So if you deal with standards like S1000D, 40051, DTA, kind of standards that kind of preach for reuse, you can check if there are any more identical paragraphs before and after, and that could then possibly allow you to create one data module or work package or topic depending on the standard and reuse it 3 times. In the second example, you can see there's not an exact match, but it's close enough to raise a flag. And it indicates that there is a possibility of reuse. And you can see that in the first paragraph, it discusses part number or maybe model number FD-5200, and in the second one it's 5H5200. So here you still can reuse this paragraph, but possibly by using applicability or effectivity depending on the standard that you are using. And by using applicability, you can distinguish between the part numbers. And there's another difference that in the first paragraph, it states that you have to visually inspect the seal well. And in the second paragraph, it does not say visually inspect, just inspect. So the word visually is missing. So it could be a typo, and then you just fix the data. Or if it's not a typo, again, you can distinguish them by using applicability depending on the part number that you're using. So content reuse analysis is effective both for reuse purposes and for QA purposes. So next, you need to decide what data you should convert and really in what order. You can first categorize the data. You can take active documents or documents that are mostly used or have a longer product life and make that your high on the priority list. Active documents that need a lot of work will probably be lower on the priority list, and inactive documents or documents that are being retired will be low on the priority list. And once you create your priority list, you start with the most recent and higher priority and go back and deal with the lower priority documents. Now, identifying a suitable DTD or schema might not be applicable every time because you may be required to go to a specific schema. But even if you are required to use a specific schema, you can start analyzing your data and see how data can or cannot be mapped. And this leads to step 5, which is the conversion specification. that can assist you with mapping the process. And I will cover conversion specification in the next slide. And you will also need to define hardware requirement and any kind of other tools that will be needed to accomplish the conversion process. So a conversion specification is a great QA document and a great method to have all the stakeholders on the same page. And it's basically the project-specific business rules. And the conversion specification can cover, if specifically going to tag data, it can cover the elements that are found in the document that you just analyzed, list any kind of examples that were found, example of the elements that were found within the document, develop a rule as to how the documents will be identified. And you can see over here like a description, and you obviously need to go through the documentation to develop really a concrete rule. And you can also list any kind of examples, how the data is going to be tagged. I mean, this is an example of an old S1000D standard, but you can show sample tagging and how the data will look like. And any kind of open items or anomalies that are connected with that element can be listed. So let's say if you determine that every time you see keyword figure, you're going to cross-reference it, there's some inconsistencies in the documentation that it may say refer to figure 5 in a different document. So you need to develop the rules, and there's going to be some open items when you develop this conversion specification, and that's why it's so important to involve the stakeholders to resolve these issues before you get into the conversion. And you will need to do a walkthrough of the conversion specification with all the stakeholders. And you will be surprised how effective a conversion specification can be. You have one central document that all the stakeholders can use and agree on, or maybe disagree on, and finally developing a document that to make sure that everybody is on the same page. And that's going to be kind of your set of rules that are used in the conversion. So the next 3 steps are dealing with designing, developing, and customizing the software. And what you're basically doing is translating the rules that you developed in the conversion specification to both a production process and a conversion software. And the production process includes also normalizing the data. And that will make your task of creating the conversion software easier. And it's also the time to start developing automated QC. And I'm not going to focus too much on the conversion, on the software itself, because that is customized from project to project. But I will cover normalizing the data and QC tools when I discuss the production steps. So moving on to the conversion, to the next step in the conversion setup component, which is training. And training can be XML training or training on the new authoring environment. If you're not sustaining the data in XML, your technical writers or other people using the data will need to be somewhat familiar with XML. Other training can be company standard training. Procedures have now changed. Dealing with electronic data versus paper is different. Even if you migrate from one electronic format to another, you still need to deal with new standards and new formats and new procedures that you now have to deal with. And talking about the process, how do you sustain the data? How do you retrieve the data? How do you distribute the new data? How you do random testing, and what happens if you need to make changes to the software? All of that requires training, and not necessarily for the production people, but also the people that sustain the data or people that are required later to go back and kind of tweak the process. So everybody needs training when doing migration or conversion. So now you get into production, and you need to organize content for conversion. So it's possible that you will need to pull the content from various locations. Even if you get all the data up front, you still need to log it into the production control system that I discussed before. And logging the data, the content into workflow system will allow you to more effectively manage the data. So for example, let's say the content is placed on an FTP site. And you develop the multi-step process where the first step is declared as documents received. And the second step can be defined as log documents into the workflow system. And the third step can be send files to OCR or text extraction and so on. So you build your process according to multi-steps. And by having the unit in the production control system, you can first track the unit, but also automate the process and know who did the process and track the process. And let's say by marking the step of document received as completed, you can create an automated email that can be sent to the appropriate people. And you can actually automate the process itself of downloading the file and placing it in your network, obviously according to predefined rules. But that can be really helpful and way more consistent if somebody drives and pull files and so on. And you can really do that for every step of the process, as long as the rules are obviously defined up front, and it's a lot easier to find anomalies when it's done by automation. So the next step is hosting and running conversion software. So you will need to maintain a facility to run the software and keep it updated, and also you will need to monitor the performance and operation by sampling material on continuous basis. So it's not just a push of a button and you're done. There has to be a way throughout the conversion process to have QC checks and in every really step of the process. So the next step, scanning an OCR, will obviously apply only when your source data is a PDF image or paper. But I'm still going to cover it over here. So really the result of scanning a document is a set of image files. And the OCR software converts the images into text. And the problem is that OCR tools and then the software that are there not always recognize data by itself or recognizes the type of the processing to apply on each section of the document. And this is why sometimes you need to manually zone the document. And really the main purpose of zoning is to control the flow of the OCR software by indicating the part of the page that the OCR tool will read, and set also the sequence or the order for reading the part of the pages. And zoning is also required to identify the images for proper processing. For example, remove white spaces, place correct dimension, or include the right data in an image. Sometimes people may want the legend as done as text, not part of the image. And proper zoning will allow you to avoid any kind of extraneous text. So if you do not zone the document, the software will attempt to read the boxes of one word or any kind of marking as characters, and it will produce poor results. And I will cover that soon when I discuss the proofreading part of it. So step 4, image processing, that can be a webinar by itself. And there are a lot of tools out there that can convert your images from one format to another by using automation. But if you need to redraw an image, that's already a totally different process, which we're not going to cover here. And if your task is to use the source images, and all the images are embedded into the source file, you will need a way to extract the images. And if your source is paper or PDF image, you just need to zone the images and saving them as a raster images. But if you need them obviously vectorized, there has to be a separate process for that. So the next steps, proofreading and pre-conversion and document preparation, deal with preparing the files for conversion using automation. And the more you do here, the better off the final result will be. So you need to kind of normalize and prepare the data before running it through automated conversion. And in the next few slides, I will show how to improve text accuracy and conversion accuracy. So the OCR tools that are out in the market have some built-in functionalities to make proofreading a bit easier to handle. You can configure in the setting to highlight characters that the OCR tool is not certain. So if the OCR tool is not certain we got it right, it will highlight it in a way that will flag it, and you can manually go and check it. You can also set your own dictionary. But the problem is that there's just so much that the OCR tool can do, and there are cases that even the OCR tool may show an item as okay, but in reality there might not be. Some common issues are the A11 being mistaken for ALL. You have the usual OCR issues with distinguishing between 0 and O, B and 8, capital I and lowercase l, and there's a bunch of them. And you will need to find a way to efficiently proofread the result. So simply by changing the font or the process, you can increase the accuracy and mitigate incorrect result. So if you start from the right, you can develop new font that enhance the problematic areas. So you can have a 1 with a small strike through, a 0 with a line, or maybe spaces indicated with a special symbol. And the reason of doing it is that it's a lot easier to distinguish now between a 0 and an O, space or combined letters, and that improves the accuracy a lot. Another option is to change a bit the process. And when you proofread a page and you look at the entire page, it is extremely difficult for somebody to pick up an error because you have all the disruption of other text around the data that you're looking at. And simply by minimizing the real estate and putting the image page above the output page, you can go character by character at a lot faster speed and a lot more accurate than you will do if it was an entire page, simply by minimizing the window of both outputs. So, and also in some cases, you may have complex items that the OCR tool really cannot handle. The output is really unclear text. You can see over here. And it can be images, it can be math equation, chemical formula, maybe complicated tables or charts. And really the image on the top shows an example of how the OCR tool reads it as text and produces really garbage. And really one way to resolve it is obviously zone it as an image, and that way the OCR does not attempt to read it as text. But if you're limited with time or have a lot of data to deal with, you will need to rely more on automation. So for one of our automation conversion, the solution was really a custom developed image analysis software, and that software identify all that unique and non-textual sections. And those sections were blocked off and identified really and categorized really according to size and location and removed from the page. And the result was really a page that the OCR tool could clearly run and recognize the text in a more accurate data, because now you only deal with text. And because we capture metadata, like the location of the item that was pulled, the size of the image, we were able to link back when we got the result to the image. So the result was a Word document with actually kind of a link to the image that was taken out. So before I spoke about preparing your data or normalizing your data. So what exactly normalizing your data means? So the source data comes in structured or styled differently from one set to another. Some of the items that are challenging to handle are steps and lists that misused. So if you have a sequential list versus steps, how do you distinguish between them? Tables that are not structured properly, paragraph numberings that are all over the place, and especially hierarchy of sections that are not clearly defined. So even if the data comes in electronic format, paragraph styles are not always used consistently. And you can try to convert the data as is, but the converted XML files may need a lot of cleanup. So what I'm suggesting is to try to clean and prepare or normalize the data before you jump into full conversion. And the main reason to do that is that you have a lot more people, and probably at a cheaper cost, that can normalize the data in a more familiar environment like the existing source data format or Microsoft Word, and trying to fix the converted data in XML usually requires a bit more technical and therefore more expensive workforce. So you can start by creating a styling document, like the one that is shown over here. And it can make normalizing the data a lot easier. This is an example of a document that is used by editors when preparing the files for conversion. And take title hierarchy as an example, and it sounds easy to determine, and it is for somebody that is looking and reading the data. But the problem is that it can easily change from document to document, and even from section to section. And one document may have different numbering schemas than another document. And some titles are not even numbered. And it could be that top-level titles are all caps and underline, and then the next hierarchy is just all capital titles. So defining all the rules for the conversion software can be very difficult and time-consuming task. So by going through the document and combining automation and manual review, you can normalize the data quickly and efficiently. So for example, styling all top level titles, heading 1 followed by heading 2, regardless of the way they appear in the source data, and again, doing the same thing for step hierarchy, so or even distinguishing between steps and lists, can be done very efficiently when you're dealing with Microsoft Word, simply by visually looking at it, determining the step hierarchy or the title hierarchy. And the more you do here, the better off your result would be. And I know I said it many, many times, but that's really the main point that I'm trying to make. So there are really 3 main reasons why you want to normalize the data. So first, it will produce a more consistent and accurate result. It will allow software to deal with what software is meant to do, and that's run through your data through predefined rules, and have a cheaper labor normalizing the data, and have the more expensive labor, like the expert, the subject matter expert, deal with the real complicated issues. So you see an example of a document that was styled. Now, developing a QC tool for pre-editing is fairly simple. So that could help a lot when normalizing the data. And just about text accuracy, simply by changing the characters, 0 and 1 to different font or different color, you can easily distinguish them between I and O and so on. And this is really when you go past PDF normal, when you go to HTML or you go to a word processing output. Here, the text flow and the styles play a key role. And if you can see, you can easily develop a QC tool that runs through the document and looks for suspicious cases. So for example, over here, you see that step number 3 was combined with step 2. Now, when you deal with word processing, it might be not as critical as going to XML, but if you deal with auto numbering, what will happen is that step 4 will become step 3. And if you deal with XML, it's going to be one continuous step instead of being 2 steps. And you can actually develop a Visual Basic tool or anything that runs through the data and check and say, okay, this is styled as a step. My initial step is 1, followed by 2. What happened to 3? So it's very simple to implement. Also, look for any kind of typos or any kind of paragraphs that begin with lowercase or numbering that is off. All of that can be easily checked via automation and save you a lot of time when normalizing the data. And if you take normalizing or pre-editing really a step further, it will help you when dealing with the more complex mapping. And here, the data was initially normalized according to appearance. So if you convert the data to standards that requires only section or just even nested topics, the conversion software doesn't have a very difficult task here. You're just simply mapping the styles to element, and you are done. So you can say, okay, this is my ARA0 or my section or whatever, and then according to hierarchy, the software will map the data appropriately. But if you need to go to a more complex standard like S1000D or other modular standards like Beta or 40051, normalizing the data is a bit more difficult from other standards. But you will, however, have to do it, but just tweak the process a little bit. So the metadata or the preliminary requirement here is styled the same way as other data, because you don't want to complicate the process and add another layer of QC. What we usually do is extract all the titles, all the paragraphs that were styled as headers to a spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet acts as a, let's say in S1000D, it acts like a preliminary data module requirement list. But in other standards, even if you don't go to standard like S1000D, you can actually map the headers to whatever element you need to. So even if you're dealing with section and chapter and so on, you can map it inside a spreadsheet, and the client can see before even conversion starts how the data is going to be mapped. And so specifically about the preliminary requirements, so you see over here, initial setup was styled as a header. Here is a sub-PT1. And so it's flagged in the DMRL as a preliminary requirement. And same apply to other titles, styled as titles. For example, tools and setup tools, material parts, or personal required. They are all being pulled into a spreadsheet, and you can map it to whatever element that is used in the schema. So if it's just subsection, fine, you can automate it. If you go to S1000D, it could be a more content-driven element, and you can map it in your spreadsheet. And again, you can see over here that you continue styling all the steps. You have figures, and you have you even maintain the pages. You have all kind of warnings that I'm going to elaborate a little bit in the next one. So, so even if you don't want to break the data into numerous data modules or work packages, you can do two things. You can either style the removal or repair or replacement that initially were titled and would have been mapped to either a data module or whatever, or procedure, and you can just style them steps. The only issue is that if this is your step 1, now this becomes your step 2 and your step 3. If you do not correct it, a QC tool that you can develop say, okay, why isn't step 1 numbered? So you can always find any kind of inconsistencies and issues. But at the same time, even if you keep it over here as a title, in your data module requirement list or in your spreadsheet, you can map it to whatever. You can map it to a procedural step, or you can map it to anything that will allow you to map it differently. Now, one thing that I want to emphasize over here is that usually when you go to XML and HTML, the whole concept of pages go away. But when you deal with legacy conversion, a lot of time the data will say go to page here, like go to page 2-3. Now, page 2-3 doesn't exist anymore in XML. So you need to link it to something. And in this case, it probably meant, do something over here in repair or replacement. So by maintaining your page numbering, you really cover yourself from two angles. Number one, QC, because when you review the data, you know where the original data was sitting. And then you can strip it out before you complete the conversion. But over here, what you can do by automation is say, okay, go to the bookmark of page 2-3 and go to the first element, the first top element in that page and link to that. Because if you leave it as regular text, first of all, it loses the meaning because you don't know what page 2-3 anymore. But then going back and manually linking it is a very, very difficult task. So once the files are ready for conversion, the software will process the file and do what software does best, and follow the rules that were developed by automation and tag the data and produce tagged XML. You will need to validate the data against the schema or the DTD and correct the errors. And the correction, actually, if you start validating the files and you see that there's a consistent error that keeps repeating, that you can tweak the conversion software, or maybe tweak the process. Maybe you start the document and you see that suddenly sequential list was done as steps. You need to develop unique styles that will distinguish steps from lists. And in some cases, the default, if you're inside the descriptive data, you're obviously not going to use steps, so the software can automatically convert it to sequential list. But you do need to go back and analyze over here the result, because it may require you to go back and tweak the process. And the last two steps I'm actually going to discuss in the next slide. Another layer of QA that can be added is when viewing the converted file. And what we do, we usually use a PC-based style sheet, and it's specifically designed for the project we are doing at that moment. And areas that are potentially problematic are specifically highlighted. So again, the whole concept of list versus steps, or the hierarchy level, any kind of typos, any kind of cross-references that may be not working properly, and anything that you need to check can be done over here with a simple style sheet. So we separate it into two frames. So when you, let's say, click on the cross-references, it will show you the bottom, so you don't have to scroll back and forth with finding where you are in those places. But also it emphasizes the elements that we use. And you can add, as many features as you want. So let's say to distinguish between a paragraph or a line, or para zero or nested section, you can easily enhance it over here to make it easier for an editor to pick up any kind of errors. And for example, here all the description are done as pink. This is a different element compared to the figure index. This is the figure number and the figure index. So you can do a lot of checks simply by modifying the way it's presented when viewing the data. And the purpose of viewing is not necessarily just to see if the text looks okay or structured properly. It's also to look that it's tagged properly. And ideally, you should test the data in the same tools the final user will be using to handle the data. But a lot of times, it might be a very content management system where you don't have access to it. So there has to be a way to test the data before final delivery. So once the data is tagged, it's a bit easier to develop automated QC on the XML. And just for example, again, you translate the data that all the rules that were developed in the conversion specification, you can check, for example, if you determine that every full page has to be tables have to be 6.5 inches, and it's not, you can check that. You can check any kind of inconsistent space, or maybe there's a space that shouldn't be there. Any kind of suspicious character, like a forward slash in the beginning, like toward the end of a paragraph. Any kind of text that maybe was not linked. Maybe a graphic board number was not done properly, so it's repeated over here, or you can actually check that the image appears here and also the physical image appears in the network. So you can do all this kind of text that with all the rules that you developed can be implemented through QC over here. And you have all kind of checks that you can do. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the webinar. Due to time limitation, we couldn't cover all the steps, but at least I hope I gave some general overview of the process. And I'll be happy to answer any kind of questions you may have.
Great. Thank you, Nave. Very informative webinar indeed. The first question that has come in is, how different will your process be if your source data is not paper?
So, I mean, obviously, if the source data is not paper, you kind of eliminate the need for OCR and proofreading, and it's probably it's not going to be as time-consuming if you deal with electronic format versus a paper format, but there's still other issues you deal with. And so even if you take electronic format and use the paragraph styles that a lot of them used in Microsoft Word or InDesign or FrameMaker, the styles are not used consistently. And again, this is why normalizing the data also has to be done when you're dealing with electronic format. But because you're not dealing with a familiar environment, so let's say if the data come in InDesign or FrameMaker, the process has to be a little bit different. And a great example can be titles. So a lot of times they may be styled as headers, but in some other cases it may be done as bold text. So one way to resolve it is obviously go and change the style, those titles, to use appropriate styles. But another way is to try to automate and pull out all the styles that I use, create a mapping spreadsheet, and see if anything was missed when you do the first run of conversion. Another issue with electronic is that you deal with cross-references, and if the data is auto-generated and you extract the data, you may lose that functionality. So there has to be a way to maintain the numbering that otherwise was auto-generated in the source data. Images, a lot of time, and that we see a lot in FrameMaker, is that you have all the text layers that appear on images. Now, obviously, if you start with paper, there is no such thing as text layer. You just zone the image and you take it out. But you have to find a way to extract the images in electronic format and maintain the text layer, whether it's by saving to a high-quality PDF and extract it, or use a script that will extract the entire image. And even if the source is HTML or XML, you still have challenges that that you can, that from one end you cannot easily prepare the data, but you can develop a script like an XSL TO that simply maps one-to-one and converts the data. So your process to getting an XML file is a lot quicker, but it may require you to clean up the data a little bit more than if you deal with source data that allows you to manipulate and prepare the data before conversion.
Great, thank you, Nave. The last question that has come in is, do you suggest the same process you described for a small conversion of 1 or 2 manuals?
Yeah. No, I mean, obviously if your project is only 100 pages, it's going to be totally different if you deal with 100 pages or 100,000 pages. And but even if you have 100 pages, and let's say it takes you 15 minutes to tag everything manually and review it and fix it, you're still dealing with about 1,500 minutes, which is over 20 hours. So you really can combine automation, or maybe, let's say, if you're dealing with a Word document and every alert or like warning, caution note is styled uniquely, you can spend 2-3 hours writing a script that will tag it for you, and then even if you cut down the process by 5 minutes a page, now you're not dealing with 1,500 minutes, you're dealing only with 500 minutes. I mean, obviously minus the time that you spend for the development time, but it's not only just speeding up the process, it's just, you know, the final product is more consistent because you don't manually tag it, and then, you know, and a human tagging everything will make mistakes after a few hours of doing the same thing. That's it.
Well, thank you, Nave, and thank you, everyone, for attending today. This will conclude today's webinar. You will be able to access the recorded version of today's webinar from the webinar archive section of our website located at www.dclab.com. Our next webinar will be next Tuesday, March 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, titled Content Development, Measuring the Trends, presented by Dr. Joanne Hackles, President of Context Services and Director of CIDM, and Mark Rose, President and CEO of DCL. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and have a great day.